Hello, and thanks for joining us today on the Higher Ground podcast. I'm your host, Tom Castriota, and I got the idea for this podcast during a coaching session I had with one of my mentees. I thought to myself, this stuff could be gold, or at least moderately useful. Maybe I can record it so you could benefit too. Then it dawned on me, I can record conversations with my friends, mentors, and other colleagues, most of whom are way more successful and interesting than I am. A few months and about a zillion edits later, this podcast was born. So whether you're preparing for an interview, seeking a promotion, or just curious about what's in the minds of hiring managers, executives, or other interview candidates, then this podcast is for you. Join us as we explore real career journeys, one story at a time. And if you actually do like the show, well, you know what those buttons do down at the bottom. Thanks again for watching. Oh, and from the lawyers, views expressed on the Higher Ground podcast are the personal opinions of our guests and me, your host, and do not necessarily represent the views of their employers, past or present. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Higher Ground podcast. Joining us today, I'm happy to introduce Preston Gisch. Preston is a product operations director at Double Verify, leading artificial intelligence and machine learning work for social media platforms and more. Previously, he's worked project, program, and product management roles at Reuters News, Vimeo, PayPal, and Google. And did we cross paths? I know we definitely worked together at Google, but did we?
I think we were in orientation together. My recollection is like a couple weeks before the pandemic, we were in a physical room in orientation together in like January of 2020.
That's right. Okay, that rings. Yeah, that rings true.
Getting our computers set up and our phones connected, and the provisioning for all the
badges and all that, all the bad photos. Anyway, so that's the backstory there. Maybe you could do a proper introduction of yourself, since I did the headline. Maybe you could give us all a little bit of detail on your background.
Sure. Yeah. I went to the University of Virginia, was really into things like marching band, college newspaper, college radio, and media. Really wanted to work in journalism. I ended up moving into the business side of journalism and media when I first came to New York City after graduating in 2007. And with the industry, how it was, I made the switch into tech by going to Vimeo, which is still very related to content and creativity. And that's sort of where I really got going from like a product and an operations standpoint. And I've been in tech since in New York City.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
I figure we'll start off with a few, the warm-up questions. As someone who works in New York, generally find New Yorkers not only have opinions, but they're not shy to share them. So we'll go.
I'm a Virginian, to be clear. I would never say I'm a New Yorker. I'm not from the city.
Okay.
So spent a lot of time paying a lot of taxes, but I am a Virginian. And I lived in New York for an extended period, but I would not call myself a New Yorker, just to be clear.
Okay. Well, we still love you. So the classic New Yorker question, at least for me, is the pizza or bagels?
Ooh. There was a point in time where I actually just challenged myself to see how long I could go without eating both. I would.
What madness drove that decision?
It was, I had a food-based, elimination diet, New Year's Eve or New Year's resolution several years, like more than a decade ago. And hummus was the hardest one because I love hummus. I think I would have to go with bagel because New York has amazing pizza. I live in New Jersey now. You can get amazing pizza. I feel like bagels are a little bit more uniquely awesome in New York, and there's many places where you can get very good or even great pizza, but bagels are a little bit more regionally locked.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Okay. Beer or wine?
Beer. I did home brewing for a while, and I enjoy both. A little bit more of a white wine guy than a red wine guy, but it would be beer, clearly.
What kind of beer do you typically brew, or any particular variety? Or
it's been a while. I did not have like a great setup for it. So I didn't have, if people do garage brewing, I was brewing in a 500 square foot apartment. So I had a tub and I would ice it down. I couldn't get the temperature really low enough for all the different styles, but IPAs are a little bit easier just in terms of the yeast
Mm,
resilience in the flavors and the temperature ranges. They're a little bit more forgiving, so that's what I would do, and then that's what I enjoy the most as
yeah.
well. But I try to drink seasonally, so like in the summer a different style than I drink. I drink stouts now, and
Interesting.
I drink more pilsners, lagers when it's warm.
Yeah, I'm very much a snob. I really
Sure.
like IPAs, and it's hard to stray. I used to drink porters and stouts, but I moved over to, and I just I can't, I don't know. I'm like my daughter, you got to try the what's the sours. I'm like, but it tastes like
Sure.
it went bad.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
I mean, drink less and then drink really good, right? So like drink a lesser amount and then just make it really high quality with what you do
yeah,
have.
that's good. Definitely good counsel. The lesser part, especially. Um, Dogs or cats?
Allergic to cats. I do really like cats, so I enjoy board games. That means that a lot of my friends have cats. So I have a whole stockpile of allergy pills and
Got it.
treatments. If I had to choose one, I'd say more of a dog person, but I do like
Mm,
them both.
okay. Let's see. Stay at home or takeout?
Hmm.
Sorry. Stay at home or go. I got to rewrite that. That's the
No.
third time I've done a mistake. Stay at home or
Sure.
go out to dinner.
Well, I have a 2.5-year-old at home, so going out has a little bit of a like an egg timer on it. It kind of expires after 25 minutes, 30 minutes, something
Sure.
like that. And it is nice to go out. I'll say, things have gotten pretty expensive recently. I think we're all experiencing that,
For
and
sure.
I enjoy working a lot with digital stuff. I enjoy the instant gratification and the satisfaction of cooking a meal.
Mm,
And I just feel like the value goes pretty far, especially
mm,
since we do a lot of batch cooking. So
got it.
going out is nice. I
Yeah.
would say probably staying home, just all things considered.
All things considered. This one's kind of I think I know the answer, but would you prefer the GVC interview or an in-person interview?
Oh, I am comfortable with both. I really like, learning about people, meeting them. In person, I think you get a little bit more body language, I think is a thing. And then when I am going to an interview, the nice thing about an in person is you get to see the office. So, like, for the last several years, you do these video interviews, and that's meaningful because oftentimes you're going to collaborate. Like, I have not worked for someone who was in my same time zone since 2019. So,
Mm,
like that is representative of how the work is actually going to go because most of it's going to happen in that way. That said, I am a little bit of an architecture nerd, so I do like to see, the buildings and the physical
sure.
spaces and the light and like how it's set up. And you can also
Mm.
see the people in the office space if you do it in person at the office. Are they happy? Are they sad? Is there a crying room? Like these sorts of things. Maybe I'm letting the media experience, show when I talk about that.
I'm sorry. Have you worked in offices that have a crying room?
Oh yeah, if you've worked in a newsroom before, you know that there's lots of screaming, lots of strong passions, and at least when I was doing media and the industry is sort of on this part of the decline, and that's pretty much
Sure.
continued. There's a lot of tension in magazines, TV
Interesting.
studios. Yeah. Mhm.
I thought you were kidding. Like I was like,
No.
okay, I'm familiar with the meditation room.
There's not,
The
there's not a sign. It's not like room, 3-0,
yeah.
like the crying room, right? But it's yeah.
I'm gonna need to reserve the crying room for 1 to 2 p.m. today, please.
I mean, sometimes it's a stairwell.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's like a part of the building where people go to smoke or whatever. But yeah,
interesting.
there's always pockets of physical spaces, and if you go to a physical interview, you can get a sense of like just the layout and the
Vibe
vibe
of
and people's
it. Yeah,
energy.
no,
Yeah,
it
the
makes
culture.
sense. Yeah.
Mhm.
Interesting. So yeah, so let's talk a little bit about like, some of the, your experiences in terms of, on the interview side of the house, whether it's
Sure.
interviewing folks or, being interviewed. And, I always like to start off with what would you say are your best, worst, funniest interviews you've ever had? Like, something that's memorable that you can share that you learned from.
I would say like when I think about that, I think about probably the ends of the spectrum. So Um, there's definitely like a happy, memorable interview that I had. It was when I was interviewing at Vimeo, and the president had a one question interview, which was more of a prompt, and it was describe your ideal workday, right?
Mm,
And I really like that because in the right setting, it sets somebody up to talk about their strengths, what they're used to, what they're accustomed to. And TLDR in mine was like some meetings for kicking off. This is for a project management role in 2013. Um, So, some kickoff projects, some stand-ups and conversations with engineers. And I put a fire drill into like a figurative fire drill. That would be funny though if you put an actual like
That'd be very memorable.
and then the fire warden tells us about the exit.
Go to the
Don't use the
hallway.
elevator. No, like just some sort of customer facing emergency or something like that in the early afternoon. That was like quickly resolved, and then some strategy documentation or whatever in the afternoon, or like a mini retro to just talk through things or something like that. But I really like it as a question, and it's one that I use sometimes for the right sorts of people. I think it's a little bit better in like a leadership or people management style interview than
Sure.
an IC or more entry level, um, because it really gets people to talk about like what they expect, what they like, what they're good at, what their experiences are, like where they're strong, and it can create a lot of nice conversation behind it. And then in terms of like the bad end of the spectrum, it wasn't an interview officially. It was when I was reorged at Reuters. There was a new boss that I came under, and so this was like our first meeting. But it's kind of like an interview because he didn't ask for me. I was assigned to him, and he was trying to figure out what I could do, how he could use
Sure.
me, et cetera. So that's kind of like a implicit interview, but
Yeah.
I'd already moved underneath him, and I mean he was probably like late 30s, early 40s, and I was probably mid 20s. It was like 25 or something like that. And the first thing he said, like, not even hello or good morning. The first thing he said was like, "What are you, 19 or 20 years old? Keep your mouth closed. Do exactly what I say, and you'll be fine." And that was just not the energy that I needed at that point in time. Having just reorged and like lost my manager to
Sure.
elimination and whatnot. Um, and I think there's a lot of learning there. He was trying to like calm me. He was trying to say like, "I got it." He was trying to be soothing,
Sure.
but he didn't do that leadership principle of engaging with curiosity, right?
Yeah.
So he didn't start from a place of like genuinely empathetically wanting to know where I was at, how I was
Yeah.
feeling,
How are
and a
you? This is
person, what am I going through? He
yeah.
just went right into like, do this, don't do this, micromanage my emotions and how I showed up, and that set the tone pretty poorly. And I did start interviewing. I think I updated my resume that night.
Like that. Yeah. At that point in time, that's a lot. I mean, I really like what you just brought up though, about like starting from a place of empathy. Like
Mm.
you've been through something difficult, and getting reorged anytime with your friends, like you maybe really liked your old manager. Like those can be, having come off the back more than once of a manager that I didn't click with, we'll say, and all sorts of ways to be, all sorts of euphemisms. But yeah, that starting fresh with someone new that you don't know, those first interaction is absolutely critical.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. That's I can, I can say that had to be off putting for sure.
Yeah,
Has
I
it
mean,
changed you? Like,
live and learn, right? Like I think
yeah.
we've all had, several different experiences, and they sort of are bricks in the wall that we build in terms of how we show up as managers, as leaders, as people.
I think that's excellent. And the best lessons I've ever learned in my managerial experiences, like whether it's interviewing or whether it's managing or being managed, it's you get the some of the best lessons from the worst managers.
Hmm.
Be like, wow, that was a really bad thing to say. I will never do that. I'm actually gonna write that thing down
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
want to repeat it. That's the mistakes you don't want to repeat.
On that topic, I think it's also important to know that more often than not, like someone is not going to be all the way bad, right? And it can be very
Oh,
easy to
absolutely.
flip the switch and say, this person is mean. I don't like them. Like it is upsetting to interact with them, so I'm going to kind of like close off. And that's a very normal way to respond to things. Um, where possible, I think it could be really beneficial in terms of professional growth to try to do a little bit of filtering, right? There's going to be a lot
Mhm.
of dirt, but there could be some flakes of gold in there too. I
Absolutely.
can think of bosses that I've had where, like, largely macro, we did not get along. And yet I really tried to, as much as I could, still say, like, there's going to be some good stuff in here. There's going to be some stuff that I can take with me or that'll help me out.
I like that principle, right? It's like, how can you, even though I'm in a situation that I might not be happy, I might not be optimized for my career or for this particular thing, but what can I take from this experience and what can I learn? And I think that's a really good outlook. from the perspective of, trying to get the best out of any situation. Sometimes it's making the best of a bad situation. Sometimes it's like, a coping mechanism, I would imagine, right?
Yeah.
What would you say is the weirdest question you've ever asked for an interview or been asked on an interview? Some people go for the weird question as like the conversation starter. Like I like the example you gave of, that one of the, starting out, but like, there was a trend people were doing. At least I remember from the .com days, they were asking like these sort of, what was one of my favorites, like why are manhole covers round?
Yeah, how many ping pong balls can fit in a school bus? Like that sort of stuff.
That's what I don't know. That's a good one.
It's just
Yeah,
it's about like if you give somebody something where like they don't have prior knowledge, just like a kind of like a blank page, and just say arrive at this, talk me through how you're getting to there. The thinking is that you see how they communicate, how they structure things, how they methodically like go after
sure.
something. I mean, weird. I sort of put adjacent to like uncomfortable.
Yeah, sure.
But it doesn't mean that it was like a bad question. There are two times that I can think of when I've been asked about. Okay, so I actually have three stories about this, but I can do them in rapid
Please,
succession. It's about experiences with particular global resources. So I've been asked in an interview, like, describe how you think East Asian people work in a professional setting, because that was a group that I'd be working a lot with, in that particular role.
Huh.
I was asked another time to explain like the pros and cons of working with engineers in Tel Aviv. I've worked with Tel Aviv engineering teams multiple times in my career, and
Sure.
so I was asked, it's like there's no like there's wrong answers. Like, what does a
Yeah.
right answer look like? And then in my current
Interesting.
role, there are many people who are Brazilian within my org. And so there was like an early meeting. And again, like not an interview, but like a significant meeting that you have when you're onboarding
Yeah,
as
yeah.
a leader. And I was asked, like, what are my experiences with managing or, being a leader of an org with Brazilians in them? And if I have any biases as towards how they show up in the workplace. So,
Mm,
you know, like the reason why those questions are weird is because like a person is themselves, and like are they influenced? Do they exist within a culture, a community? Like, yes, of course. And also like they are them, right? So it doesn't just mean because there are certain reputations or because maybe you've worked with people from a part of the world or a culture once, it doesn't mean that these people that you're talking to are going to be like that.
mm,
um, and yet you don't want to just opt out of the question because it's being asked for a reason. So you don't just
sure.
want to say like, I don't see regional difference, like, sort of
Tel Aviv
bad
is not a
version of I
place.
don't see color sort of a thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so it's a tricky one to answer because sometimes you might not really understand like what the question asker wants. It doesn't
Mm,
mean that you would give a blue answer for one person and a red answer for the other. It really means like how can you be honest and authentic about what you think, and then also not like drag too much of prior history or experiences into where you're at now, because
yeah,
these are completely different people. Just because they're in the same area of the world or the same culture doesn't mean that the things are going to be the same. So it's a tricky answer to navigate. And every time it was asked, like I thought after the interview, like, why was this asked? Because I'm
mm,
a big believer that the questions that are asked in an interview are also statements about the workplace that you're going into. There's a lot of
absolutely.
intentionality into question design and like sequencing. So every time I had questions like that, or that were sort of like kind of like non-standard questions, I thought
Yeah,
to myself, if I converted this question into a statement, what declaration would they be making about this team or this culture or this company?
that's really insightful. And do you think it's appropriate for a candidate at that place? Because again, the interviewer generally has the power, right? Is it okay in your mind, right? I think there's multiple answers here, but I'm curious what you think about asking the question of saying, well, what, that's an interesting question. Like what makes you ask that?
Yeah, I
Kind of a
think
bold move, right? A little bit, depending on how
I
you
think
depending on how you ask it, I guess.
Yeah, I think the way that you even put that is really good. Like not all the time, but I try to transmute my whys into whats. So like instead of like let's say that I'm working with somebody and I can tell that they're upset about something, I don't
Mm,
say why are you upset? Because like that
mm.
answer could be like I'm having trouble sleeping. I'm upset
Yeah,
about,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
thing
yeah.
XYZ or something like that. And you don't say it this robotically, what in the workplace is causing you to feel upset. Like you don't do
Sure.
it like that. But it would be like there's probably something going on, that's affecting, how you're doing. You want to
Mm.
talk about it? Like turning the whys into
I
other
like
things.
that.
So, you said like what's causing that question to be a part of the interview? As in like,
Yeah,
why are you asking that? That's like it's
yeah,
good to be
yeah,
direct.
yeah.
It's good to be a direct communicator, but that's a little bit too. It's kind of like judgmental as opposed to curious. That's a
Mm.
nuanced thing, right? So yeah, I would say something like, oh, do they have any questions for us? And then come in with your prepared questions, right? You've done your research, you've looked at the competitors, you understand the company, you
Mm.
understand where they've been, where they, could be going. Like those are the better ones. And then sometimes it can also be good to then say, like, I'm curious if you could share with me, you're probably asking that question to multiple candidates. Is there something that's like specific to this
Yeah.
role that I should know about with this? And they'll say something like, oh, well, you're going to be working a lot with, people in this area or something like that. I'm hiring somebody right now, and in the job description, I list out the specific parts of the world where this it's a people manager, but like where
Mm,
they'll be working with, and so then that person can either have green flags or non-green flags around time zone, around
mm,
culture, around language. For some of the candidates that we're seeing, like they have family in those parts of the world, or they speak languages that are also spoken in those parts of the world, green flags, right? The
sure.
red flags we would have trouble perceiving if somebody said, "I'm not going to apply because of,"
Right, right,
then we
right.
wouldn't be able to like measure that.
Sure.
It is meaningful, to know, especially from a time zone standpoint, if you're going to need to be online late or early for things, and then if there's culture or like language things going on.
I like the green and versus red flag. Do you actually capture those in a methodical way? Like as you're assessing a candidate, do you have colored markers, Preston?
So like within the interview sequence that we're going through right now, we have a question bank, and then we make sure that we have consistent questions with consistent language and consistent sequencing, so that the
Mm.
process is fair, for everybody involved. And we'd say right at the start, like these questions are the same questions that everyone receives, and we ask them in the same order, and we do that for fairness.
Or do you
And
literally state that up front? Like you're
yes,
getting. Oh, that's fantastic.
not that's. I think that could be like more of a thing. It's been something I've been doing this for maybe 9 years now, 9, 10 years, something like that. Um, Different people have different schools of thought on that because it is more rigid, right? So you can't pivot, you can't be as nimble like in the interview to like double click on something. I mean, you
Sure.
kind of can, but then you start to move away from it being the same interview for everybody. But if you want to treat the candidates truly fairly, you'll have scripted questions. You'll ask the same questions to every person, and you'll ask them the same way. You'll literally read the question, and then that way, also like you don't want this, but if like you were sick, but you still needed to get that interview through, at least you have that as a constant, right?
Mm.
So it's a way of sort of controlling uh, the variance, if you think about it from like a numbers and a rating and a metric standpoint, and then it's a way of
Sure.
creating like fairness for everybody. Specifically looking at like a bias, if like people have different backgrounds, if people have different ethnicities, there's different ways in which bias can come in, and you
Yeah,
can
of course.
de-bias the process by having scripts, sequences, and consistency, so that it's an even playing field among folks. So within that, I then have here's what a good answer looks like and a couple of bullet
Mm.
points, so
Mm.
that other interviewers can also make evaluations. And then here's what a bad answer looks like.
Mm.
And over time, if you use variations on the same question, or when you model in your own mind, like what do I want to hear, right? And then what do I not want to hear? One of the
Yeah.
common points in a bad answer is vagueness or non-specificness, right?
Mm.
One of the good things that is more of a character trait of like good answers is if a person is unclear on something, they say like I didn't quite understand blank, or like I want to make sure that you get a great answer. Do you
Can you
mean this,
clarify?
or should I
Yeah.
talk more about
Yeah.
this? Like clarification gaining, at least in my line of work, is a really important thing, and so that's a green flag, for example.
Mm. Yeah, I've often coached candidates, particularly on like sort of the technical interviews or where there's some kind of proficiency involved, where they're maybe not sure of the answer.
to say you're taking a guess. Like you
Yeah.
can ask the clarification question, but if you're still not sure, let's say, like just to literally say, I'm not sure of the answer, but I think it could be. I
Yeah.
find that very powerful because it shows two things: creativity, obviously, right? And if they got it wrong, they're honest. And if they got it right, they're genius.
It reminds me of some advice I got. And it was around, and this works for specific workplaces. So like this was advice around like fintech and in like the financial spaces, but it was when doing, estimates or when like making assumptions within things, to not actually give a discrete answer, but to give a range of an answer, and then try to say with confidence, like, I think it's more in this part of the range. So,
It,
if the actual answer could be anywhere between, 1 and 100, you say, I think it's between 45 and 62. I'm 80% confident that it's within that range. And I'd say that the best actual place where I think it would be within the range of 45 to 62 is at 51. And here's why. So what you're
yeah,
doing is you're scoping it, you're giving a confidence interval on it, and then you're supporting it with reasons. And then people can talk about the reasons as your inputs to your estimate or your range or your confidence. And either to say, because like that gives the interviewer a handhold where they can say, okay,
yeah.
now double the total addressable market. What does it look like now?
Like now, what
Okay,
does it?
now slice it, but only for outside of the US customers, right? What does it look like now? So when you give these doorknobs and these handholds and these handles to an interviewer, right? You can sort of steer them on a path when you say like the reasons why. But if someone says we're looking for a number between 1 and 99, and you just sit there with your arms folded for 20 seconds and say 30, that's a bad answer because it doesn't go anywhere from there. That's a binary. That's a right, wrong, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
ranges, confidence interview intervals or percentages, and then supporting reasoning, right?
Mm.
And then that keeps the conversation flowing. It's almost like improv in a way.
Yeah, yeah, the prompts, yeah, and the ability to then take it in other directions on both sides. The candidate can move as
Mm-hmm.
well as the interviewer. Do you worry about like one thing again? This is maybe more on the straight technical proficiency questions, but do you worry about people the word getting out? Okay, they're going to ask me these 5 questions in this order, so you could over prepare. Like, do you worry about that cheating? I guess
Uh,
is the
it's
question.
it's different for each candidate. So I've never had the same sequence. And at
I
least
see.
in places where I have been, or I like to make this at places that I arrive where it doesn't exist, there's a question bank, right?
Hmm.
So we're only going to pick, let's say, 4 to 6 questions in a 30-minute interview out of a bank of 20 to 30 questions,
Got it.
right? And then there's going to be different members of the interview panel are going to be looking for different things. So some
Got it.
people are going to be looking for technical expertise. Some people are going to be looking for subject matter expertise for
Hmm.
whatever like the role or the department is. I might be looking for, what does your managerial toolkit look like how do you manage people, how do you show up in that way, because that's the role that I'm on right now. So
Hmm.
if there's a robust bank, then you draw from that, and sometimes you try to tailor it. There could also be like specific values that you're looking for. A lot of companies have corporate values, and often a part of the interview process is how does somebody show up at Double
Hmm.
Verify. It's passion, accountability, collaboration, and trailblazing, right? So we've designed into this sequence, elements of each, and we look for them in the answers, and then we ask questions that specifically steer people towards talking about those things. And the more homework someone has done to understand those values and how they are a part of and are informed by our customers and our products and like where we're going, right?
Hmm.
The more people can kind of like weave it in. So it really rewards someone who does their homework and goes
Hmm.
through, like the about us and the mission statement sort of stuff and the product marketing and the GTM. The more homework you do, the better you understand the vocabulary, the better you understand how things are structured, the more you layer it into your answers. And then the questions are prompting you to say the things in that way. So it's kind of like, good results in, good results out. The better prep shows up as a better interview, which is more aligned with how the questions are sequenced.
Yeah, I can't tell you. I think the common theme through every single one we talk about candidates. What
Yeah.
can you do? The preparation, preparation, preparation. Right. Know
Mm-hmm.
you know who you're going to talk to, not just the individual, but to the extent you can. Right. But know the company. Like at
So
a
I got a
minimum.
story about that. I was in my early 20s, and I ended up at Shape magazine, it was a women's fitness magazine, and my
Okay.
nickname there was the boy. I was one of the only men on staff. And after I started, I did, talking about like why, you ask like, why? I did ask after I started. I was like, I mean, why did you hire me, right? And my boss said, we met with many people who have more experience than you, who have more industry experience than you, right? You were like on the lower end. And it was clear that when we thought about them and we thought about you, that they didn't prepare, they didn't do their homework, they didn't read the magazine. And it was clear that you really showed up, you had done your prep, you had done your homework. And we don't want someone who just thinks that like they deserve this role. We want someone who feels that they need to like earn it and like do the work. So you might not be exactly who our target audience is, but you showed up and communicated that you had put in the work and the effort. That's what we're looking for, rather than someone who is, like within our target demographic or something like that.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I can't say the value in doing that, not just, I think there's two significant bits of value that you hit on the value to the company, and you're increasing your hit rate, right? But I also think that if you're really being fair about your homework and you're reading it and you look at the company like, you know what, these values really align, or their principles or their ethos or their messaging really aligns with mine, or it doesn't. And you're like, you know what, I'm not going to apply for this job because they do this, or they don't like that, or they've made these public statements around XYZ. So it gives you that almost forcing function to make up your own mind. Now, granted, again, if you have to feed the family, then that's a different, you may have to make compromises. I get that part, right? But at the end of the day, like, it gives you the opportunity. It's almost a forcing function to help you, shape your decision.
Oh, there it is.
That was terrible. Sorry.
So no, apology accepted. There's different ways to go about this. Some of it involves, like if you need the job or you just need to work, like it can involve a little bit of lying to yourself, right? So let's be real about that.
Realistic, yeah.
It is really beneficial when you're looking at a job description or when you're looking at a company to be able to tell the story of how prior roles you've had directly plug into this job that you're applying for. So what do I mean when I say that, right? Let's say you're at job D and you have experiences at A, B, C. You should practice. This takes 10 minutes. Like, go for a walk, right? Like, load stuff into your brain and then go for a walk and come back and like take a couple handwritten notes, right? You need to be able to look at the job description and say, this part of it is like job A. This part of it is like job B. This part of it is like job C. So when you're interviewing for job D and somebody says a version of, why do you want this job, right? Your answer needs to be a variation of, this job is a combination of my favorite parts of my last 3 jobs, and it's stuff that I'm good at, and I see how I can get better at all of them together. And then what you do is your answer says, this part of the job I did at job A, this part, etc. You have to be able to tell that story. I had an interview recently where I said, a variation of like, why do you want to work here? And the person said, well, I've been doing a lot of contract work and I really want, like a staff job, right? It wasn't quite that, direct.
Yeah,
it's just that's not terrible. And it is honest, right? So this is good.
Sure.
But what it didn't do is it was not even like an average. It was below average. It wasn't even like, I'm really into the industry, or like, I like how you do this and your competitors don't do it. Like, there was not even the bare minimum of like, I looked at your company's website for 2 minutes. I asked an AI agent to read your latest investor relations report and like give me 5 bullet points to talk about.
Bullet points, like how hard? Yeah,
there are ways to do this, right? Yes. But you're going to have a really good success rate. Sometimes it can involve lying to yourself, so be mindful about faking yourself out when you do this.
Yep.
But where you're able to, try to find points of connection between the job you're going for and other things you've done, because people really like it when they think they're hiring somebody that is excited about the role and also has valid experience where possible from multiple jobs before. That's sort of Frankenstein into like, in a way, this is kind of my dream job because it's my favorite part from this one and my favorite part from this. When you can tell that story, you're going to move up into that upper tier of candidates within the pipeline.
Completely agree. I'll add just one more element to that. I like the synthesis there. The only addition to that, from the perspective of the interviewer, I agree with you, and I appreciate the honesty. Like, I want a full-time job. Thank you for telling me what you want. But what I would like to know as the interviewer is, what do you want? What's in
Yeah.
it for me? Like, why should I, what I want to hear from you, like you said, is these excite me. This drives me. This will teach me. This I will learn. It's okay to say, I'm excited about coming to your company because I want to learn about XYZ. Like that shows a desire to learn and a passion,
Mm-hmm.
but it also tells me, the interviewer, that, hey, this guy or gal cares and wants to grow and is gonna put energy into learning those new things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no doubt. You're exactly right.
Here's a tough one, I guess. Like, how do you, and this is more of a managerial question. So
Yeah.
how do you tell an employee that, or a direct report, or that
Yeah.
they're not at the bar, they're not performing where they need to be?
I think
Tough question, I know, but
well, this is like a big part of what these roles are. It's like
yeah.
saying the hard thing in a way that causes the result that you want to have happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like I think a big part of it is like you need to think like what do you want to change?
Mm-hmm.
And then not like what do I want to say, but what does this person need to hear in order to have that change occur? And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, with like being genuinely curious about people and empathetic and like trying to and wanting to understand where they're at, and then what you can say that's authentic and non-fake to get them moving in that direction. Trying to think of, I can think of some like very current things, but I don't think it'd be right to talk about those.
Oh, no, not at your current. No.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about it, things that have like aged enough where it's like it's all right to talk about it.
Yes. Yes.
One of my go-tos is to call out that there's perception and there's reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that the reality might be that someone is putting in time and effort and working hard, and that the perception, because of maybe like if they're not showing up to work on time, or things that they deliver in meetings have a lot of like typos or spelling errors, and it's not a language thing, it's like an attention to detail thing. Because you treat these things differently depending on like the source. If you know like the reason why it is in a thing, like you're not going to ding somebody if their language isn't 100 out of 100 if they spelled something wrong, or whatever. And so I really just try to lock in on like, if the and sometimes this is the case, sometimes this isn't the case. If the reality is that the person is like relatively focused, showing up in a decent enough way, and it's some of the detail stuff that they're missing, like they're not communicating when they're logging off, they wrap up early, they start late, they consistently miss deadlines. One of the places where I start, because there's a whole sequence of this too, you don't just deliver it once, it's like a continuous feedback thing.
Yes.
As I'll say, like, it really sucks if you're showing up in this sort of a way, but you're perceived in this sort of a way, like that feels unfair, right? Because you should be seen for what you're bringing and what you're doing. And so what I want to do as your manager, leader, the person giving you the feedback, what have you, is I want to give you a couple ideas, and like ultimately you are going to do or not do or sort of do whichever of these. So it's going to be your choice. I want to talk about, from my experiences or my opinion, my point of view, some things that you might be able to do so that people can more accurately perceive what you and I both know you're actually doing and how you're actually happening. And sometimes by getting people to focus on how it shows up to other people, they will actually they'll actually accidentally get better at the work part of it rather than the like optics and perception part.
Interesting. Yeah, because you're forcing awareness, right? You're forcing them to be more aware of not just the communication side of it, but like, oh wait, I missed that typo, or I missed that. That's logically incorrect, or what? Interesting.
So it's a good place to start is to talk about like one-to-one and just trying to have perceptions match up with reality. Most people have a self-definition of like, I work decently hard, I care a decent amount. Like most people aren't like, oh, I'm completely unfocused, I'm a mess, I'm really bad. And if you can align, and if you can be like on the same side, and then like arms around each other figuratively, like looking at a challenge or an opportunity, that's like, we both know that people aren't perceiving you the way that they should. Let's talk about getting the perceptions aligned to reality. And then once you get to that point, you begin like a success trend. And then you start to say, now let's up level the reality, and the perception will come with it. The harder thing is when you have someone who is just functionally not showing up, like they in reality are like actually not doing well.
Mm.
And so much of that feedback is going to be dependent on your HR policies. So, like,
Mm.
what does feedback look like? What is needed? How does it need to be documented? Generally, in larger organizations, you're going to have a HR business partner who you can work with, and there's templating, and there's various structures all the way up to
Sure.
PIPs. And then in smaller ones, you kind of got to go a little bit more of like what feels right, what's
Mm.
non bullshit, what's like a fair, correct thing to do.
Yeah.
And it's also different generationally too. Different people from Gen X all the way to Z. Broadly, very broadly speaking, that's a very
Probably. Sure.
generalized statement. Want different kinds of feedback
Mm.
delivered in different ways, and then there's accountability is not quite perfectly overlapped between people of different experience levels, and then there's also just what the person's individual life has been and what they've been through, so that there's a lot of variation in it,
Yeah.
which is why
Uh,
for stuff where like you really got to be a little bit harsher with it. It's good to like start, I mean, give direct communication with people, but when you start to go
yeah.
on that like direction,
Yeah. Yeah.
talk with your HRBP and like
Yeah.
see
Make sure
sort
you
of
got your
what you need to do.
yeah, the I's dotted, T's crossed, all that. No, I
That,
think so.
that that's a hashtag for the pod, right?
Yeah,
HRBP.
exactly. I know we're running up on time. Very last question. If you were to give your younger self some advice, what would that be? And younger is your definition, how far back you want to go.
I don't know that I could like pick one. There's like a couple of things that I've thought about
Mm.
like over my career. Like I was told, and I think a good amount of people who are in their early to mid 20s are told this, that like you got to be patient, right? I
Mm.
did not like hearing that, and I don't tell it to people. I
Mm.
do have an appreciation of what people meant that were later in their career when they told me that. I think that the way that I took it when I was younger was that like you don't just get to climb the ladder based on merit. Like you kind of need to age into it, and that didn't feel right to me. Like if I'm working hard, if I'm delivering results, then like the results should speak for themselves, and then I should like earn into the opportunity to better impact the business. The way that I think is a better way to do it, because it felt like suppressive when people would say
Mm.
be patient, is there's value in like several laps, right? So if each year is a lap, right, and let's say you're in the media industry or like a very ad sales dependent sort of a thing, there's
Mm.
seasonality. Q4 is going to be very different from Q3. If
Mm.
you've been at a company for 2 years, you've done two laps. If you've been in a company for 5 years, you've actually seen some things like shift and move, especially
Mm.
depending on the size of the company and how dynamic it is.
Mm.
So rather than this like sort of negative suppressive energy of like, um, like you need to be more patient, right? Like just wait and things will come to you. They're like, no, it's more like there is value in paying attention to a focused thing, that being like this job, this department, this work function for like 2,000 days, right? Or at least 1,000 days. How many loops are you taking? How many laps are you going around the track?
Mm.
Because like there's a phrase, it's like no person sets foot in the same river twice. As the notion that the
Mm.
river is like always flowing. It's the same
Constantly
sort of
changing.
thing. Like maybe if you've been in a company for 20 years, you could be like, oh, this is like 2011 or something like that. But
Sure.
more often than not, especially in tech, the 2020 version of a company is pretty different from the 2023, is pretty different from the 2026. And if
100%.
you're roughly in the same spot ish, and I don't mean don't move up, and I don't mean, don't internally transfer, and sometimes financially companies will take advantage if you stay put, for a really long time. So there's financial benefits conferred in moving periodically. And that's the counterpoint. You got to be the right amount of impatient as well. Um, I definitely think that the reframing of like thinking of the advice for my age now that I'd be given in my early to mid 20s of like be more patient. It's more like there's value in having some stamina,
Mm.
because it can really give you a lot of learnings when you see the
Mm.
same thing through a second, a third, or a fourth time. And sometimes things only happen once a year. Like if you're in a very
Mm.
retail heavy space, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, that's happening once a year. There
Mm.
could be Singles Day in different parts of the world, right? But if you have these iterations, much like a product iterates, right, to
Mhm.
improve, going through another cycle of budgeting, going through another cycle of reorgs, there's a value to going through things, over a period of time.
So that's advice that you got that you didn't like, but then you grew to like.
I sort of like reclassify it a little bit. It's
Okay.
less
Okay.
it's
No,
less
that's
the
good.
negative of like you are impatient, be more patient, and it's
Ah,
more like there is positive beneficial value
in
in
being.
being observant over a period of time.
That's
So
awesome. Thank you. And thank you very much for taking your time out of your schedule. I appreciate you very much. And look forward to our next in-person conversation, which hopefully
yes,
we can do soon. I know we
absolutely.
kept trying to get that on the docket, but we'll make it happen.
Great.
Cheers.
Well, thanks,
Preston,
Tom.
thank you so much.
Cool.
Take care.